who needs it. But in the meantime, welcome everybody to our April History Talk. I'm so excited to be having Down the Research Rabbit Hole because I cannot wait to hear some of the interesting stories. I mean, every session has interesting stories, but but still excited. So I'd just like to thank all of our authors and our moderator, Autumn Bardot. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Autumn.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. We love coming here every month, and we hope that, and you had a lot of people last time, and so we're hoping to have lots of awesome people this time. Hi, everybody. I'm your moderator, Autumn Bardot, and I'm going to let our fabulous writers introduce themselves. Janet, could you go first?
Sure. I'm Janet Wertman, and I write fiction that is set in the Tudor era. I also have a blog where I post all of the interesting outtakes, all of the stuff that I couldn't squeeze into the books. And so I can be all Tudor all the time.
Awesome. Glen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Glen Craney. I write historical fiction and historical thrillers over a fairly wide area of eras. And this is my first time with History Talks, so I'm happy to be here.
Okay, Glen's a little bit laggy on our side, but we'll get through it. And Anne, please tell us about what you write.
Hi, I'm Anne Louise Bannon. I write a variety of series, but the main one, of course, is my old Los Angeles series set in 1870 Los Angeles, featuring Maddie Wilcox, a winemaker and physician. And but I also write in the 1920s and have been playing a lot with the 1980s of late. So, although given that I originally wrote the 1980s series in the 1980s, I really don't like calling that historical fiction. So, but these are my books right there, and I do lots of research. I'm about to start research on number 4 on the old Los Angeles series. So.
Awesome, awesome. And Martin, tell us about your books. You've got quite a few.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Martin Turnbull, and my historical fiction focuses on what we call the golden era of Hollywood, which is the studio era, which is specifically 1920s through to the 1950s. There's a lot to write about. I'm about to release my 12th book, and it's what I love to read and what I love to research, and that's what I focus on.
That's awesome. And I think we can all just give Martin the fabulous Best Voice Award right now, Best Accent Award right now. I think we'll just...
Bloody hell, does that mean I have to start talking in a British accent now?
Actually, it's an Australian accent, but it's close.
Well, I didn't get any owls.
Okay, so we are going to get started with the very first question, and that is going to be for Martin. Martin, how much time do you spend researching a new time period?
A new time period? Well, my time period is always the same. Like I said, it was the 20s through to the 50s. So when I started out with this, I had a 9-book series in mind. So I figured I needed to know very specifically what happened when and to who and what was the result and who was involved in the 32 years time span that I had in mind. So I sat down on the couch and I read every biography, autobiography, and memoir of every Hollywood player that I could come up with. Specifically, my series is set at a hotel. So I started with the people who stayed at the hotel. And these are A-list names like Humphrey Bogart and Errol Flynn and Dorothy Parker and half the Algonquin Round Table were there. So they all had memoirs and autobiographies and biographies. So I started with them and expanded to those people who they worked with or they married, as well as histories of the studios and of the history of Los Angeles in general, because my fictional characters are going to be interacting with these factual people. So I sat down for a year and I read everything I could do, anything I could find. And as I did, I took notes. And as I went through each book, I compiled all those notes into a timeline. So by the time I finished, I had a timeline of history of the history of the period I was writing about. And very detailed of what happened and who, when did Ciro's open and when did the Macambo close and when did the MGM merge, all that kind of stuff. So by the time I started writing, I had the factual weave of history that I could then braid my fictional stories through. So that has actually kept me in good stead through the next 3 books after the series that I wrote, because that's what I write about. So I wanted a very detailed history. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. Glenn, tell us, how much time do you spend writing a new time period?
It varies by the book. I'll take, for example, my most recent one. See if I can show it here. It's called the Cotillion Brigade, and it's a true story of the most famous female militia in American history, set during the Civil War in Georgia. I came on this story 30 years ago when I was a journalist in Washington, D.C. And my research tend to go into 3 phases. I'll do what's called the incubation phase, where I'm just kind of searching for a story that I'm willing to be passionate about, to devote a year or 2 in writing. And then I'll go to, if I find one, then I'll go what I call the immersion phase, where I just find everything I can, primary and secondary sources. And once I get through that phase, then I'm on to the writing. But the research for me doesn't stop there. There's still details that I'll stop and research while I'm writing. So that's the longest I've ever taken on a book, 30 years. I would say generally 1 or 2 years, usually.
Okay, that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, it is.
Janet, now you've got that one time period.
You would think that would make it really easy, wouldn't you? So I follow actually Martin's formula of a timeline, and a very careful timeline to keep me absolutely, honest, and to know exactly what I'm going to include in each of the books and everything. But so much of the individual things changed so radically. Things like foods, a lot of new foods showed up during during the Elizabethan era that were not there when Henry was king. The clothing changed, the religion, everything changed radically. So you would think it'd be easy, but it actually almost makes it more difficult to get the small details right for each different period. So I spend a lot of time.
Gotta get those little things in there so people know that the time did change. There were new things constantly, and that's fun, but it's also like, when did it get there exactly, and how I'm gonna put that in there. Absolutely. And tell us how you research a new time period.
Well, the most recent time period I ended up researching was Los Angeles in the 1870s. When I came to the point where I was going to write Death of the Zanjero, which is the first in the series, I purposely set it after the Civil War because I just really didn't want to deal with it. I knew I was going to have to set it in the American era because I'm just an American. That's all there is to it. So the research, I think, took me about a year, but another reason I also picked the 1870s is I was reasonably familiar with Victorian culture anyway. So, I took more time when I was researching the 1920s, when I first wrote Fascinated Rhythm back in the 80s. That's my 1920 series. I took a lot more time doing that because I knew less about it. But the Victorian culture I was fairly familiar with already, just from general reading and everything. So I went to my primary documents. I'm big on those. Spent a lot of time rereading everything Louisa May Alcott ever wrote, because that was the voice I keyed in on. So if Maddie Wilcox sounds a lot like Louisa May Alcott, that's why. And also spent a lot of time going, honey. My husband is the archivist for the city of Los Angeles.
What do you want?
Yeah.
Oh,
Kibitzing again. And anyway.
What do you need this time?
That's good. You have an on
I have an on-site historian, yes.
On-site
It's very,
historian.
but no, he actually kind of got rather annoyed with me when I came to Death of the Sun Hero because he was doing this wonderful lecture on the zanja system. Zanja is Spanish for ditch. And they dug ditches off of this big ditch off the what we now know as the LA River called the Zanja Madre, or Mother Ditch. And then they had smaller ditches, and they would irrigate the place that way. And so he's talking about how you get your subscription and everything. And then you know, they come out, you pull up the gate, and I'm thinking, I write murder mysteries, guys. What am I thinking? Yeah, time for a body to show up. So, but then he goes and gets me out all the city council minutes and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very, very cool.
Glenn, tell me, how do you know what to keep and what to skim over?
Well, that's a tough one, but what I try to do is keep what I can convey to the reader in action, to keep the action moving without getting bogged down with a lot of backstory. And I think there are ways there, as you do it more and more, you write more books, you get a little more adept at kind of fooling the reader, feeding some of the backstory information little by little, so they don't realize what you're doing. At least that's what I try to do.
Okay. And what about you, Janet? How do you know what to keep and what to skim?
At early on, I was laughing when Glenn was talking because I used to be in a critique group with a guy who wrote Russian spy novels, and he would get my drafts, and you know, there would be spots where he would just say, "This is a brochure. I don't want this." And he would get, you know, that would be the thing. And I'd have to pick out, well, why did I put that in? What did I want to convey? And then just pick out the little essence of that. Like, you know, the white towers, the white stones of the tower, not talking about it just because they're white stones, but what does that signify in the moment? So that was basically my line is, if it makes my eyes glaze over, then it's got to come out.
I like that tip. If it makes my eyes glaze over, that's what it's going to do to the readers. I like it. Yep. And tell us how do you know what to keep and what to skim over?
A lot of different things. Part of my problem is because I write murder mystery, and you've got to hide your clues and everything. And clues show up in the ordinary daily life stuff. So I have to be very careful how they do this. This is why I have an editor. Editors are my lifesaver. I bitch about them, I complain, what have you, but really a lot of times, you know, and I will use Janet's tip. I mean, because, you know, but if I'm writing along and I don't know what that's referring to, okay, I gotta clarify this. But bottom line is, I use edit. I rely on my editors because, I mean, sometimes you do get a little excited about this stuff, but other times you really do need to have that sense of the daily life, or you're not going to know where the aberration from the daily life is. That means we have a killer, you know? So.
Okay. Martin, tell us, how do you know what to keep and what to skim over?
With my first drafts, I put in everything. I put in all the history, all the plot, all the dialogue, all the jokes, all the transitions. I just don't censor myself. I just put it all in. Consequently, I end up with a huge, massive first draft, but that's okay. I know that's what's going to be. So by the time I finish the first draft, I know the complete story. I outline very heavily first, but sometimes it changes in the writing. So as I'm going through, I'm keeping in mind two things, like Glenn said: what moves the plot forward, and what's the more interesting aspect of the thing that I'm talking about. Because I may bring a certain nightclub or a certain event or a certain film reference several times. So I'll chop out all of them, but the most interesting one that happens at the most interesting part of the plot, where things shift, things move. So it's the contrast of time and place then versus now but also combined with the most interesting part of the plot, where I can throw that in so I know the reader is really, okay, what's going to happen next? That's where I'll keep in that. So I end up chucking probably half the story, but what's left is half the details. What's left is the most interesting detail at the most interesting time in the story to put it forward.
You're looking for those golden nuggets.
Yep.
Autumn, can I add something?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, this is usually the cart after the horse, but I'm in the process now of reviewing my audiobook. And that's the best way to know what's extraneous and what isn't, having to listen to somebody read your but it's too late by the time you get to the audiobook because it's all locked in. But that's a sobering experience when you realize, well, maybe I went a little too far on that.
You know what? We have a question from somebody on Facebook. So I'm going to read the question to you and any of you can handle it, okay? It says, have you ever had a reader contact you and tell you about a detail you got wrong?
Oh, yes.
I'm just waiting, but no.
No, because I write fairly recent history compared to the other writers here, I'm 20s to 50s. I have a lot of people who read my books that actually lived through the period that I write about. And they often write and say, you know, actually, that nightclub, that's not how it worked. That's not the atmosphere, or that's not how it actually worked, which is a little bit late for me to go back and correct. I mean, I can go back and correct. If it's a tiny detail, I'll do that. But it adds to my knowledge of the period that I'm writing about. So I love it when people do that, because it expands my knowledge, especially the more intimate details, like how do you do a collect call in 1923? Or how much was the red streetcar up Hollywood Boulevard? Was it a nickel? When did it go to a dime? Did they have tokens? All that kind of little tiny detail stuff that I may have missed or gotten wrong. So yeah, I hear from people quite a lot.
I've had readers. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I've had readers contact me to tell me that they're related to characters in my story, and it's really unusual experience. I've written a couple of medieval stories, and I've had readers say I was related to that character, and I don't express my skepticism at that, but whenever somebody tells me, for example, they were related to Robert the Bruce, I have to hold back and say, well, everybody in Scotland claims they're related to Robert the Bruce. So, but that's a common one for me.
I was contacted by someone, I'm going to make another tower reference, but there are a lot of them, where I had mentioned that the tower had been built by William the Conqueror, and trust me, that related. And the reader got in touch with me to let me know that actually William the Conqueror relied to a great deal on the early drawings of the medieval Knut in his design of the tower. And I decided to let that one go. that was one of those things that, no, I'm not adding to the word count. I'm just going to stick with that. And poor Knut, I am glad that I am able to give him his credit here.
And also, Janet, how much of that was the fact that, yeah, it may or may not have been the Canute and what have you, but the reality that all the people that you're writing about at the time were also thinking, yeah, it was William the Conqueror.
Right.
Which kind of leads me to my next question, and this is going to be for Janet. What is the toughest part about researching?
The toughest part is inconsistent reports and unreliable biographers. So you have a lot of the facts that we have, our best sources, the contemporaneous sources, are ambassadors who are reporting the scuttlebutt that they're hearing. So a lot of the stuff you kind of have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. But at the same time, that's the best stuff. And I reserve the right, this is contemporaneous sources from people closely placed. I reserve the right to use it because it's gold. Some of it is just wonderful, and I'm not giving it up.
Martin, what's the toughest part?
The toughest part for me is that I'm relying on a lot on these biographies, memoirs, and autobiographies of these people who lived and worked in the era that I write about. But this is Hollywood. This is an industry and a town that's built on exaggerating the truth, making the truth rosier than it is, selective memory. It's a lot of the source documents are newspapers and magazine articles that were fed information by the Hollywood studio publicity departments, and they were basically just copied out word for word, because so it's the story that the studio wanted the public to know. So my problem is sort of wading through the exaggeration and the guff and nonsense and trying to find different accounts that talk about the same situation, the same relationship, the same movie production, and then finding like a Venn diagram where they talk about this and their overlap is this and their overlap is this. So I focus on where their stories overlap. But also like Janet, I figure if Lauren Bacall has written about this in her autobiography, I'll take it.
It's a lot of vetting. It's a lot of vetting of information. Yes. Anne, what's the toughest part of researching?
Being scared spitless that I've effed it up. I have. It's
G. Let's keep this G rated.
sorry. But no, I mean, because Maddie's a doctor in 1870, 71, this is right at the time things like sterile surgery are starting to happen. Louis Pasteur did his germ theory thing in 1867, 68. So I was desperately trying to figure out when sterile surgery came to Los Angeles, because there really wasn't much written about it. And, you know, it's like I'm always glossing over what people are eating because people didn't write down and post to Facebook that they had chicken for lunch, you know? It just, you kind of had to figure, you know, you're kind of figuring these things, you have to like make some educated guesses. So I made a couple educated guesses and discovered I totally messed it up. And I'm in the final edits for Death of the Chinese Field Hands, which is the third book in the series. Third book in the series. Let's keep this straight. And I realized I finally found this site that had a whole bunch of historical medical journals. Oh, wow, this is awesome. I got a doctor. Oh, so I start reading these things. And there was one journal, the California Medical Gazette, 1869. And in the first article in this particular thing is on the mal-air or bad air theory of disease, because they thought it was bad air. So I'm reading through this thing, and about 4 or 5 articles in, Joseph Lister's article on sterile surgery. And this is 1869, the year before the series starts. Shavings. Okay, that may not have been what I said. But I did get one out on it. There is a graph in a paragraph in Chinese Field Hands where Maddie mentions that the first 2 stories in the series may have been based more on memory in what the letters she had from her sisters, because her journals all burned up. And there is a spot in Death of the City Marshal where everything burns up. So but it was still, oh man, that is my research nightmare. It really is. That I'm gonna look at, and somebody's gonna discover, yeah, it was raining on that day in 1871. And I'm like, no, it wasn't.
I think that could be another whole panel, research nightmares.
Oh, yeah.
But now I'm gonna ask Glenn, what's the toughest part about researching?
For me, it's the reliability of primary sources too.
Oh, yeah.
In the medieval times, I don't worry about that quite as much because I assume the sources are not reliable anyway. Usually they were written by some monk who was paid by the king, and his job was to put the king or whoever he was writing about in the best light. But when I'm researching 20th and 19th century stories, I try to be a little more careful, and you have to triangulate different sources to try to come up with what looks like to be the truth. And I'll give one quick example of this. I wrote a novel about the Bonus March in the Great Depression. These were World War I veterans who marched on Washington. They were led by this charismatic but troubled hobo named Walter Waters. And he wrote a short memoir of the time, talked about his wife in it. And yeah, I thought, well, I'll just make sure he's right about some of this. And I looked up the marriage records, and he had gotten the name of his wife wrong in his memoir. And what I learned as I went a little farther into this, people during the Great Depression oftentimes changed their names and identities. They were moving from place to place, trying to get jobs. And they thought one way was to simply lose their original identity and start over again. And it got to the point where a lot of people were so fractured in their own identity that they couldn't remember what their wife's maiden name was. So I learned a lot from that experience.
That's kind of wild. Like, that's wild. Okay, here's another question for you. And I'm going to ask Glenn to keep, because he's on a roll. Okay. What is the fact that you hunted down that you are most proud of? And did you end up using it in the novel?
Yes, this was same story, the Bonus March. A police chief was in charge of Washington, D.C. at the time, and he was one of my main figures. And he went through a divorce at that time. His marriage failed. And his archives were kept at the University Research Library at UCLA. So I was able to go through them, and I could tell everything had been sanitized in terms of his personal life. That's what I wanted to get into. But I knew that I kept in the back of my mind his ex-wife. Wonder if she had anything. And I found out that her papers, she was from Texas, were kept at the Daughters of Texas at the library next to the Alamo in San Antonio. So I said, oh, am I going to pay for a trip, a flight to San Antonio? I don't know what's in there. It could be a couple papers. So I decided to do it. And I got in there, opened the files, and it was a treasure trove. There was a package that had never been opened, even by the historians. She had written a book, an unpublished manuscript of their life together. And all the intimate details, everything I needed in my story was contained in that unpublished manuscript. So for me, there's a lesson that when you're almost to the end of your research and you think, do I go with that one extra step? Do it, because you never, and the second moral is, if you can find anything written by the ex-wife or ex-husband of your character, go for that too.
That's a good one. I like that too. Yeah. Martin, a fact that you hunted down that you are most proud of, and did you end up using it in the novel?
There's actually quite a lot to choose from, but I'll choose one from my most recent book, which was about Irving Thalberg, who was a movie producer at MGM. He was the movie producer of MGM. And he was married to the biggest actress at MGM at the time, a woman by the name of Norma Shearer. They went to a ball. The Mayfair Ball was one of the biggest social events of Hollywood's social history, of social year. And that year, the women were asked to wear white. Norma Shearer arrived in a dress of scarlet. Now, Norma Shearer was a classy lady. She was a nice girl, and did all the right things, but she arrives at one of the biggest balls of the year in scarlet, and everybody else is in white. So that was a scene. That's a very colorful scene I can use. So and there's not a lot on it. Most things on it is the fact that Norma arrived in scarlet and everybody else is wearing white, going, what is she doing? But what I found was, at that very same ball was the first time that Clark Gable looked at Carole Lombard and went, oh, I like this. This I like. So their relationship turned into one of the legendary relationships of the Hollywood era. And this is the night where it started. Now, what happens is that these days, hardly anybody really remembers that Norma wore a scarlet dress. What they remember is the Clark Gable, Carole Lombard relationship that became one of the power couple of Hollywood in the late 30s. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've got this that I wanted to write about and this that I should write about. So I found a way to fold both of those events going on at the same time, because we're reading this from a 21st century perspective. My readers are Turner Classic Movie fans. That's my demographic. So they'll know all about that. So I found a way to fold both of those unexpected details into the chapter. And that's actually one of my most proudest chapters that I've ever written. I thought that when I finished that, I went, oh, I nailed that one.
Janet, how about you?
So,
Hunt it down that you're most proud of, and did you end up using it in the novel?
so it is not necessarily, I just have to tell this story. For the path to Somerset, there's a spot after an aging Henry VIII has been betrayed by his 18-year-old wife. And he retires to a private castle to drown his sorrows. And I put him in the Tudor equivalent of a bathrobe eating ice cream out of the tub. and so the question was, what would be the equivalent of ice cream? And unfortunately, it was whale blubber.
Oh,
Right. It was, and I couldn't use it. It would have taken too much to explain that it's a delicacy and this and that. No, I just wanted the visual. So I just, I had him eating something other than ice cream out of the tub, but he was in, a fur-lined robe to do that.
And that's actually a great example of stuff that we find out and we can't use because of the ooh factor.
Yeah.
Right?
The medical stuff. Ew.
And how about you?
To be honest, what I'm most proud of between the sterile surgery, because that was a real tough one. I mean, I spent so much time with the librarians at LAPL trying to get that one parsed out. But the other thing is how the sluice gates on the Zanhas worked, because I'm going through the city council documents. $50 paid to the Zanhero for materials. They didn't say what the materials were. So, and actually I found, and the other one we had a hard time with was, how did they make wine in 1870? Nobody wrote it down because they just did it, And so, so what we eventually came up with was the tourist literature. Finally mentioned there was somebody writing about life in Los Angeles, and there's hell to pay if you leave your Zanha gate up. They raised and lowered. Okay. They were made of wood. Something else referred to it. And it was just this obscure little reference. And I profoundly thank the research librarians at LAPL, because God bless those people. They really came through. And so, and then when I went over to the wine archives at Cal Poly Pomona, wine industry archives, how did they make wine in 1870? And we had to do some ditching, had to do some serious digging, but we found it in the tourist literature, which is, if you're looking for, 19th century, fortunately, you have that on. I use the tourist literature also for the 1920 series I did, but boy, that can really tell you what's there. And it was just really interesting.
We have another question from our Facebook Live group, and I will read it to you. Okay. Says here, I have learning disabilities, which mean that reading books, even audiobooks, are not reliable options. Asking questions of experts is my most effective means of research. Does anyone have any tips in interviewing people, asking questions of experts, getting prompt responses, and follow-ups?
I used to be a journalist, so this is kind of right up my alley. And I've been asking people all sorts of strange questions, including the guy at a scuba shop about about how scuba tanks work once for something that never actually came to anybody. First off, your question is not stupid. I think you have to really get settled in. If you're curious about it, somebody else is. I remember emailing a guy from the Model T club once, and then we were doing this email, but he was just, huh? Why? I'm asking, how many ways can you sabotage a Model T truck? Which I needed for the plot line of the story. And he's going, well, you can do this. Why? So your questions are not stupid. That first off, that's the most important thing. Again, with any expert, always be aware that they do come from a certain perspective, as Martin was saying earlier, that some of these aren't reliable for sources.
Do any of our other authors
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Do any other our authors have experience with interviewing people?
I'll just add one caveat to this, is that sometimes if you're contacting academics on a subject you're writing about, you can run into some territorial issues with them. I've had some that, they're a little leery of giving up information because I say, well, this guy's going to write a novel. He's going to sell more than my little nonfiction history book about it. And I've found some of that in the academic community. So you have to be careful about that.
Okay, I'm going to just put this out there because it also depends on what you're really looking for. And if there's any way to leverage Facebook groups, there are Facebook groups that are devoted to absolutely everything. And shout out to, there are several Facebook groups on falconry who helped me develop for the Boy King exactly what hawk would have been the right one for a boy of 6. And if you were trying to, I had them going and we were just going back and forth because I wanted it to be, okay, would it matter if he was like a prince or a little bit lower? And what would be a little bit of an insult? What would be, would you offer him because a female bird was smaller? And they just helped me through and decided exactly what my little 6-year-old boy would have as his first hawk given to him by his uncle, and then have his father go, well, he should have had one of these. They helped me through with all of that. And there are just Facebook groups about everything. So just go find it and people will help.
Martin, do you have anything to add?
Nope.
So here I got 3 for our Facebook Live watcher. We got 3 responses for you. 1 is just ask. 2 is be wary of territorial academic issues. And number 3 is Facebook groups rule. Okay, time for our next question. And I'm going to ask this of Martin. What is one of your secret research skills?
I don't even think of this as secret, but my world opened up when I discovered newspapers.com.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I now have access to how my characters were written about in newspapers and in movie industry specific journals and magazines. I can also see how they were presented, like the photographs that were supplied by the studios for the consumption of the public, that the image that they were presenting or had presented for them, which isn't necessarily how we remember them now. I found a couple of times that one of my characters was a silent screen actress, a real actress by the name of Alana Zimmer, and she now has a reputation as being a very avant-garde. Her sexuality was very fluid. She was one of the first female film directors and film company directors. But until that's the 20s, that's how we remember her now. But in the teens, she was a very highly respected dramatic actress. She was kind of the Meryl Streep of Broadway with interpretations of Russian drama. and very, very highly respected. And so her image evolved as she evolved. So I can now go back and sort of clock how her public image evolved and what they were saying about her evolved. So that was a game changer. That was fantastic.
Okay, Janet, what about you? Secret research skill.
Okay, I'm actually going to steal from you, Autumn. Okay, just a little aside. You didn't get an introduction, but you're not only an author, you also run a YouTube with videos with little hints and things in there. And one of the things you said resonated with one of the things that I do, which is paintings. And paintings, and you can also find like the floor plans of castles and all of this stuff that is, so you can see what people looked like, what they cared about. You can see exactly where they lived and what they have to go through to get to the different chambers, where the kitchen was located, and all of that. So it's, but paintings, I remember it was like, there you go, that's mine.
How about you, Anne? What is your secret research skill?
You mean besides my husband?
Besides,
No, I actually have 3 of them well, 4 of them, because I've already mentioned the tourist literature, which is wonderful, but sandboard maps. Oh my God, I love sandboard maps. They're these fire insurance maps that were drawn up. I think they started in the late 19th century. And if you look at them just right, they can tell you what the building was made of, where it was, how big it was. They're amazing. Love ads in newspapers. I mean, newspapers in and of themselves are great, but the ads, oh my God, those are gold. Those are your daily life clues, man. And oddly enough, planning documents, city planning documents. Now, I don't usually do it too much because newspaper source plus access. Oh, we are going to talk about getting an SCPL. There's something in the chat, but no, the planning documents. I collect planning documents for a real estate developer, and there's a couple of sites on the City of Los Angeles site. We can go into that some other time. I was going along, grabbing this, running my microfilm through, getting it scanned and getting it printed. And there was this one doc on this one connected to this one address that this developer was interested in. And it was a conditional use permit that's asking the city council to say, hey, can you set aside your usual zoning issues to allow this to happen? And it was a defense plant in the El Segundo area. And they wanted to put in a child care center. The date on the document was 1942. Yeah, that was, I just looked at that. I unfortunately didn't keep it. That's another tip. If you've got it, keep it, for God's sakes. Don't ever forget, oh, I can go back to this, because you can't. But no, I mean, I was doing some stuff recent past on my 1980s series, and stumbled across a planning document that told me, I was wondering what was going on at this particular mall so that I could make sure I was writing about it accurately. There it was in the planning document. Who knew? I mean, it's odd, but yeah, they really do have. And my husband, actually, one of the things at the archives is absolutely amazing that he has are pictures from the Public Works Department of what the streets in Los Angeles look like at various sundry times. Martin, you might want to look at these. I'm not kidding. Oh, I love sandboard. But yeah, no, they are actual pictures. Okay, we're going to change this. Click, 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 click. This is what it looks like now. And they date all the way back to the 20s.
Okay, so we are running out of time. I want to get Glen in, and then I want to ask some other quick questions before we close. Glen, what is one of your secret research skills?
When I visit the sites I'm writing about, the first thing I do is I stop at the cemetery and I walk the cemetery. I have found so much information from doing that. What the stones say, who's buried next to whom, Why isn't the wife buried next to the husband? So much of this opens up questions. And in my recent book, I discovered that my character wasn't buried in the small town that she helped save. So I went to the small archives and museum in town, and I asked them about that. They said, well, she's out there. We know she's out there. I said, I don't think so. And they started digging and looking, and they realized I was right. So that opened up a whole new avenue for the story.
Very cool. Okay, for all of you, how do you organize your research? Glenn, tell us how you organize all your research.
With my last book, I changed. I used to use binders. Now I use Scrivener, and it's really, it's revolutionized my research. I have everything in one place. I can pull stuff off the web. It's a wonderful tool, and it makes so much easier to have it right there next to your manuscript.
Awesome. How about you, Janet?
Okay, I use Scrivener, but I want to go back to what Glenn said about cemeteries, because I've got a really good cemetery story. I had one of my characters, her father died in 1536. And we know this because he's got this absolutely gorgeous tomb that was erected over him with the date of his death, December 20th, 1536. So I wrote it in along those lines. Turns out, after my book was published, somebody started looking into it. And this absolutely gorgeous tomb, which, you know, carved the whole way, was wrong. They got the date wrong. It was built by the man's grandson because there was like treason and he went out of favor and everything. It was built by the man's grandson, and there was nobody really alive who was there at the time that he died, so nobody noticed that the date was wrong. So the cemeteries, you would think that at least you could count on carved stone to be right about your facts, but no. And it's not something that I can correct easily by just changing the date, because there are a few scenes built around it, but not many people know about it. They, you know, so we're just going to stick with that. But I had to follow up.
How about you, Martin? How do you organize your research?
I have several master documents. I have my Los Angeles history timeline that goes back as far as I need it to, which is turn of the century through to the late 60s. So that's one. I have another master document of every cafe, restaurant, nightclub that I could possibly have ever come across in all these memoirs and biographies that I've read, along with who owned them, their telephone number, when they opened, when they closed. So I can go through, if I want to set a scene somewhere interesting, I can go through my master document and go, oh, Ciro's, that would be perfect because blah, blah, blah. So I've got that. And then that goes to all my books. Then I open a third one, which is specific for that book, where I create a timeline specific to that particular story. And that's where I throw in plot ideas, character ideas, names, the big movies that were out that year, who won the Academy Awards. So I go from very, very general down to very specific in this folder. And as I'm researching, I'll grab photos of people or places or buildings that I might need to refer to later, or posters. So I chuck that all into another folder. So I end up having quite a tree of folders of books and photos and facts.
You mentioned Ciro's, and my ex-mother-in-law's mother was a bookkeeper at Ciro's.
Really?
And yeah, and my ex-husband actually has all the Ciro's glasses with Ciro's on them.
Yes, you are. Oh.
She knew, yeah, she knew all the Brat, yeah, she knew all that Brat Pack worked for a
Right.
Bugsy Siegel, was it?
He was in everything, so yeah. Until they offed him.
Okay, Anne, how do you organize your research?
Evernote. I love Evernote. I use Scrivener, but I want to have my files someplace. I also do a lot on little bits and pieces of paper. This is my style. And so I have file papers, and I've redone my filing system 5 or 6 times over the past few years. But it's a combination of things, but mostly Evernote. I mean, you can just you got that Wikipedia article on when the fountain pen was invented. It's reasonably accurate. Click, hit it. You know, you've got a little button on your browser, and Evernote just clips it and puts it right in there, and I can put it in the right notebook. So, you know, there are, you know, when I have to, when I download, when I'm, you know, doing the PDFs from the microfilms at the LAPL on the newspapers, click, put it into Evernote. I can get my hands on it fairly easily and fairly nicely. So, and I can take photos, scans. I love Evernote. It's actually a lot easier. Glenn, I use Scrivener too, but I will tell you, Evernote's a little better for things like scans of tombstones or, you know, documents.
Yeah, I just copy and paste into Scrivener into little files, and never had a problem with it.
I don't. Yeah, I've never tried copy and pasting, but I think the thing is I want it more for general use. I don't want it that dedicated. But that's me.
Morgan, do we have time for one more question? I've got.
Yes, I'm monitoring Facebook.
Awesome.
Yeah, we can do one more.
Awesome. Okay. So here is the last question of the day. Okay, Janet, what unusual thing have you done in the name of research?
I went on an archaeological dig to Sudeley Castle. They believed they had found the outline of an Elizabethan garden that had been built specifically to entice Elizabeth to visit shortly after the Armada victory. And they had like the water feature and this feature and that feature, and we all got to dig it up. It was a crowd-funded thing. And I spent the first day digging, and the second day was much more up my alley. They gave me a little toothbrush and a little thing of water, and they just had me clean all the finds in the nice shaded tent. It was absolutely lovely. So I had the pieces of pottery and it was wonderful.
Glenn, what unusual thing have you done in the name of research?
When I was a journalist, I covered the largest reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg. There were 10,000 reenactors, and they let me stand right behind the Union line at Pickett's charge with all these muskets and cannons going off and horses spooking. I really could get a sense of what it was like to be in a battle from that.
That's fabulous. I've been to Gettysburg. It's amazing. I'd love to see a reenactment. Martin, what unusual thing have you done in the name of research?
Not that this is all that unusual, but I did hijack an MGM tour. One of my characters was a screenwriter at MGM, which is now Sony. So it's a completely different studio. So I wanted to just go there to just get a lay of the land. And somebody said to me, don't bother. Those tours are all about the new movies and the current movies. They don't do the old stuff. Nobody cares about the old stuff. I thought, yeah, well, we'll see about that. So I just joined a tour, and they were right. The first couple of stops was all about, I don't know, whatever the current movie they were making. So I said, excuse me, I've got a question about the old stuff. And the guy kind of looked at me and went, oh, okay. And so I asked a question about the MGM years, and I just kind of kept on asking the questions. And in the end, he took us to the sound studio where the Munchkinland from The Wizard of Oz was filmed. And he took us to the trap door that the Wicked Witch of the West disappears into when she disappears in a cloud of smoke. And by that stage, I sort of involved several people in my group. So it became the MGM tour after that. Like, they didn't even talk about the new Sony stuff. It was all about the MGM stuff. So I was very happy with that by the end of it. So yeah, my lesson was just hijack the tour. Just keep asking questions until he gives up and tells you what you want to know.
Who wants to go on a tour with Martin on Old Hollywood? Sign me up.
I do. I want to see Martin go up against my husband, who also loves Old Hollywood.
Oh no! Okay, I'm out. I'm out. Now,
and
I go big on silence, so you're safe.
Okay.
What unusual thing have you done in the name of research, Anne?
Drink wine. No,
It's a tough
actually,
job.
yeah, I know it's such a tough job, but no, actually, the fun thing, one of the reasons Maddie Wilcox is a winemaker in Los Angeles was that my husband was doing a lot of research on winemaking in Los Angeles. By the way, we had grapes, we were shipping them to Napa before Napa was Napa. So on you. And, yeah, we were shipping wine to San Francisco before Napa even happened, guys, you know. So first European varietals here, you know, in the, you know, if you've ever seen Vignes Street downstairs, that's after Jean-Louis Vigne, the French man who brought European varietals in the 1920s. So there is the oldest building extant in Los Angeles right now. It's the Avila Adobe. It's in Old Era Street. They've got a couple of vines back there. Michael got crazy and decided, hey, can we make grapes? There's grapes on those vines. Can we make wine? And sure enough, he did. He made a wine that they made at the time called Angelica. It was a style of sherry. And so that's what's in the book. And so I watched my husband make Angelica. And that's what I did. That's probably the oddest thing I did, besides asking the poor guy from the Model T Club how you could you know, sabotage a Model T. He still didn't get that one, but he was very helpful.
We are right at time. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I encourage you to join and to look at the Facebook profiles, the Amazon author pages and websites of all of the authors on here, including me, Autumn Bardot, and I write historical fiction and urban fantasy and have a YouTube channel for new writers. And Morgan, I'm going to let you say the last few words.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you again. This has been wonderful and engaging, and I've learned a lot of things. And yeah, so it's been a privilege. Thank you. I just in the chat put a link to a WordPress site that has information on all of the authors and how to get at their books and other information. So definitely check that out. and buy their books. You know, I definitely recommend renting or getting books at the library, but buy them too. As you can see, I don't stint. So beyond that, this is the last history talk for a couple of months. We're taking a break for summer, and then we are scheduled to come back in the fall, and we're working out the details on what those talks are going to be. So we're really excited. Stay tuned. You can go to the library Facebook for events or just SantaClaritaLibrary.com. And once again, thank you to all of the authors and Autumn, who is our author moderator.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you guys for showing up. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. So